I talk about coping a lot. It is my privilege in my professional life to work with young people in discovering the unique ways they can navigate the impacts of trauma, anxiety, depression, or other challenges and find strategies that help them feel whole, capable, and resilient. I care deeply about this work, and I care deeply about the young people I work for. I am only helpful to the students I serve when I'm able to really listen to them, when I have taken the time to truly be curious and present to who they are as individuals. When the pandemic came along and we moved to remote learning, I had to shift the whole model of how I served my students for that entire year. Having never provided therapeutic services over phone or Zoom before, I was wholly unprepared for how different it really was. I had taken for granted completely just how much information I take in that is nonverbal, that is based on the physical presence of a person with me in the room. I felt hobbled, and I felt genuine distress and panic because I couldn't get that same kind of felt sense of how my students were doing or what I could be doing to help. This led to a period of real anxiety for me, and I began to feel increasingly helpless. I noticed myself beginning to fray at the seams. It was in the middle of this time of anxiety and overwhelming worry that somehow I found my way back to an old hobby, one I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I started knitting. I know it may seem strange only to non-knitters or crocheters, but knitting really helped me find my ground again. In a time when everything was virtual and I felt helpless and disconnected, here was something tangible, something I could do with the labor of my hands to express my love, care, and concern for others. In that strange place and time when everything was going so fast and yet at a standstill, here was an activity where I could mark the time, stitch by stitch, until the project was done. These projects helped me know that I was moving forward and not just stuck in that strange purgatory. I felt a restored sense of connection when I made something for someone else. I loved to think about what colors they would like, how they would enjoy it when they received it. And it was like getting to spend time with them, even though we couldn't be together in person. Now, there may be some debate as to whether I gifted knitted presents or I inflicted them on my loved ones. But I felt so grateful to have a way to express my love. And there was real satisfaction in seeing my children, my nieces and nephews, play in the snow with heads kept warm by the hats I made them, or seeing them play with the knitted stuffed animals I was able to conjure. And finally, knitting brought me into a community, which I believe is one of the most important ways we cope. If you are ever lonely, go to a yarn store. It is a place of shared creativity, problem solving, and connection. You can ask anyone how to start, or you can bring in a project and ask how they can help, and you will get more than you bargained for. When I came to this church for the first time, I saw the Dadics and Dolores Hurd knitting in the pews, and it was a big reason why I instantly felt at home. I found that knitting is something that feeds my soul on many levels, and I'm so grateful I found it. As one of my favorite knitters, Elizabeth Zimmerman, says, "Knit on with confidence and hope through all crisis." I hope you have a hobby, a craft, or a passion that feeds you, that nurtures you, and that brings you into community.
Hello, everyone. This is sort of just a continuation of everything else. Seems like it fits the theme very well. So earlier this year, there was a service that talked about perspective a lot, seeing things through the eyes of others. And that reminded me of an experience that I had, which I'm going to share in my reflection today. So as a quick aside, it's always something I felt really appreciative and empathy and compassion when I hear stories like those we just heard now, and other stories from people. I appreciate what everybody's going through and the perspective that it gives me and the chance to connect with others. But when I tend to think about myself, I tend to downplay those things and don't think about them as much. And I say, well, I have all these privileges and I count my blessings. And I think about what we can do to build a healthy, equitable, just world for everyone, rather than focus on my troubles or something like that. But when I had this family medical emergency, I had an interesting experience, which is that when I found myself telling somebody else what was going on, that was when it felt the most emotional to me. I was in the middle of dealing with everything on my own, and I keep always thinking there's somebody else out there who has their challenges, and so many people go through so much, and this is, just me, and I have things to be grateful for. But when I was seeing it from the eyes of how it sounded to someone else, hearing what I had to say, suddenly it hit me in a way that it didn't hit actually living it. So I think stories are essential and part of understanding how we make sense of what we're going through and how we cope with whatever we're dealing with. So I'll go into it and actually say what I'm hinting at here. But I can say my story in many different ways, and that changes how I feel and how people around me react to the situation. So there's a matter-of-fact story. A couple years ago, my father, who had Parkinson's disease for a couple decades now, it's been a challenge for a long time, but he had this issue with lymphoma, and it was a long process. But we got through it, and he's in recession now, and so we're okay again. That was a challenging time in my life, and that's it. That's the sort of matter-of-fact version of the story. Of course, I could tell you the much more challenging, emotional, here's all the details, and it's a little bit more hard to say. So there was a day that my dad just sort of fell out of his chair and couldn't even get up and had no energy, and they had to get rushed to the ER, where they found a tumor in his stomach. And he went home on a liquid diet for a week, sort of okay enough. And then when he was told that his lymphoma was not carcinoma and he could actually go back to eating if he takes it carefully, he was so excited that he got a pizza at the cafeteria while I was there to pick him up at the hospital, and got his stomach obstructed and ended up with 6 weeks in the hospital and lost tons of weight, and he got totally delirious and didn't know who people were, and things went really, really sideways. And it was the craziest time of my life. And when he was finally out, we still had to hire 24/7 caregivers, in addition to my mother and I being there 24/7 for some months. And it was a totally crazy situation. And some of the caregivers, I was saying still, well, we have all this help, it's great, whatever. And these caregivers were saying, well, I've been doing this for 20 years, but this is the worst situation I've ever dealt with. So that was, some perspective for me. And I had all these crazy stories, like how the night he was released, they were supposed to give us this feeding tube equipment, but it didn't show up, and I had to do all these phone calls, and finally at 10 p.m., somebody came by and dumped a bunch of boxes on the steps and left. And then we were totally exhausted and had to figure out how to deal with boxes of crazy feeding tube equipment in order to get food into him. And it was a totally crazy situation. Okay, and so, whoa, it feels crazy just to imagine what it sounds like to everybody else, to tell the story, and then to hear it from that perspective. But of course, I could tell it a totally different way. I could tell a story about how grateful I am and all the blessings that we have. So I could say it this way. We had access to premier medical care. We at OHSU was a wonderful program in a lot of ways. My mother is available and able to deal with things. She's an amazing caregiver. My wife, Samantha, who incidentally is not here right now because she's at home taking care of a yard sale that our son Rowan has been planning all summer. And but she was able to take care of so many things when I was suddenly just not available for an extended period of time. And my sister, Sarah, happens to be an ER doctor. So thanks for that. She was helping us get through the medical system and sort of knew how to talk to doctors and everything else. And each of us, Sarah and I, expressed how we were so, so grateful to have somebody else, a sibling, that we were having to go through this, and it would be so much harder as an only child to deal with the challenges that we were facing. And in the end, my father had his test that showed he was in recession and there was no signs of cancer. And right after that test, we were able to announce that our son Rowan is going to be a big brother. So everything all worked out, and that's a different version of the story. So none of these stories are exactly right or better or clear. They're just all different. And there are many, many other stories I could share. Some are absurd and hilarious. It was a whole crazy time. And there's many, many different ways and framings that I could use and styles for how I could tell these stories. So different perspectives and framings have such a huge impact when we're coping with difficult situations. So by consciously reviewing and adjusting how we think of our stories and what sort of perspectives we take and who we share our stories with, that can give us a lot of different ways to deal with finding whatever's appropriate and the most healthy way to think through whatever we need in each moment. And so that's a method that I encourage everyone and use myself for thinking about not getting stuck in a fixed mindset where there's this one emphasis, but there's many, many different ways to see every situation. And having community with which to share our stories can mean so much and can broaden our views that much further. So thank you to everyone here for building and sustaining this community and sharing your stories. And I look forward to hearing and telling more stories with everyone into the future. Thank you.
I wrote my, here I'll stand in front of the mic. I wrote my piece for this about 5 times, and every time I went through it, I didn't like it. And so I decided I'm just going to get up here and just share my story. And I've been learning how to cope my entire life. I think part of it might be because my mother and her parents lived through the Nazi occupation of France, and I probably absorbed some of that, even though I was born after the war. And then my dad was rather critical, which is not uncommon. But I would get this message every day at the dinner table that I was a terrible communicator, and I would be put on the spot where I had to talk, but then told that I was terrible at it over and over again. And I mean, after a while, it kind of gets to you. So anyway, that's a little bit of my early on, my start. But so it's been an interest to me. I'm very interested in trauma. There's been a lot of work done on trauma in the last 50 years, and the people are learning so much about what causes it and how to move through it, how to heal from it. And I want to talk about Stephen Porges just for a minute. You might be familiar with his name, Stephen Porges. He wrote Our Polyvagal World. He was the author of the polyvagal theory about 30 years ago. And don't let the name scare you. But this is, about the fight or flight, rest and digest, and everything that goes along with it, and how this is a very automatic process. This is not a conscious thing that you do. The circumstances in life will trigger you. They trigger me all the time, so I'm aware of them. And so for me, it's learning how to reset myself. That's a huge thing, learning how to reset myself. And in this book, he's got this color chart here. You can see the colors. You probably can't see the words. I'm going to read a few of them. But when we feel life threat, that's the red, okay? Bodily shutdown, blacking out, dissociations, numbness, depression, hopelessness, helplessness, and so on, okay? And as an example, the people in Gaza right now are deep in the red zone. They have a lot of healing to do. I hope they get a lot of support. When we feel danger, we're in this zone here. We're not feeling a life threat. We're feeling danger. We have physical activation, fight or flight, panic, restlessness, reactivity, rage, and anxiety. So I think, restlessness and anxiety, those are very common. Those are the things that you can actually get from our everyday activities. You get on the freeway, somebody cuts you off, kind of rattles you, or just everyday things where you don't feel as resourced as you would like, and how are you going to come up with the energy, the resources, and everything that you need to get past that hurdle, So these things kind of build up. over time. And when we feel safety, that's the green, that's where we want to go. The behaviors are optimizes social behavior, compassion, mental and physiological calmness, critical thinking, the neurophysiological foundation for mental and physical health, and an ability to be an effective co-regulator. And co-regulation is something that we're doing right now. This is one of the best things we can be doing. We are together with each other. We're hardwired for this. We are together with each other, are safe, in a safe place with trusted friends. This is one of the best things you can do for yourself to get into this green zone. Anyways, I find this very interesting. I highly recommend the book. It's written for lay people, and so it's easy to read. And I really like Stephen Porges. He's got some YouTube videos and podcasts, and I would like him to be my friend. I'd like to just hang out with him. But, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the things I do. Oh, God, I'm out of time. Anyway, I'm sorry, but one of the things I need is downtime. And one of the things I do is I just load up my schedule with things to do. But one of the best things I can do is to have downtime where I can get in touch with myself and what's going on inside here. So that's really important. That's one of my things I do for coping. Another one, breathe. You know, deep breathing is something when we're scared we forget to do. But deep breathing is a cue to your autonomic nervous system that it's okay, you can relax now. So deep breathing is a really good thing to do. Being in community, that's what we're doing right now. I do yoga nidra every morning. I did this because I got AFib after you-know-who got elected in 2016. And it's interesting, I met 2 other people who came down with AFib after this election, that election. And anyway, so I started doing yoga nidra. I read about it, and I wanted to do it because it was a way to help my health. I mean, there have been clinical studies. There are a lot of health benefits to doing yoga nidra. And what you do is you lie down. You can do it sitting, but you can lie down and listen to a guided meditation. I have about 7 or 8 of them on my phone. And so if I get tired of one, I can listen to another one, although I have my favorites. But I do this for sometimes an hour and a half in the morning, early. I get up early so I can do this. And you're perfectly still. You're doing this guided meditation. You go through your whole body scans. You find the areas where you're holding tension, you know, and you let go of them. By the time you're done with this, you are good to go. It's amazing. It works beautifully, and over time, it builds. You are growing neural pathways in your body so that you have a better sense of being grounded and present, which is another real benefit. So there are lots of benefits. I can't even think of all of them. There are books about it if you want to read about it. And then the last thing I do, which I really like, is breath work. I do neurodynamic breath work, which is available online. I started doing it back in the 80s as holotropic breath work, which is done, it's a regular breathing practice, which then is done with music. And what this does is you are able to tap into old traumas, trapped energy, and release it. And it does it in a way that feels incredibly safe. If you do it as holotropic breathwork, you may be in a group doing it. On neurodynamic breathwork is done online, and you're in a virtual community there. And you have there's a group leader that if you need to talk to somebody, you can. But that way you're able to release some of this trapped energy, which is old trauma, which gets kind of stuck in our bodies in various places, and it just really wants to get out. Anyway, I've used up my time, well over my time. Thank you for your being generous with letting me go on and on. Thank you.